Lesson 3 is the first lesson that discusses security, focusing on authentication. Of course, authentication is necessary for authorization and auditing. The 70-685 exam focuses on troubleshooting, logon issues, and problems with credential management. It does not focus on managing user and groups on a local computer or on a domain. However, understanding users and groups on a local computer and understanding Active Directory is essential to understand login problems and problem with credential management. Also, understanding Active Directory is important to understand group policies to configure Windows settings within an organization. In this chapter, you will learn how to define authentication, authorization, and auditing, and explain how the Security Account Manager relates to workgroups, manage users and groups on an individual computer and within a domain, explain the purpose of user profiles, explain the purpose of Credential Manager and the use of Credential Manager to manage your credentials, compare and contrast rights and permissions, explain the purpose of group policies, list and change the settings within the account lockout policies and password policies, explain how to enable auditing on a Windows computer, and given a situation, troubleshoot authentication issues. The bottom line here is mentioned in Lesson 1. A workgroup is usually associated with a peer-to-peer network, which user accounts are decentralized and stored on each individual computer. Since each computer has their own security database, if you have several users, you need to access the computer while requiring unique username and passwords. You will need to create a user account for each user on the computer. Authentication and logins. When discussing authentication, be sure to look at the AAA model, which is short for Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting, also known as auditing. Authentication is the process of identifying an individual, usually based on a username and password. After a user is authenticated, users can access network resources based on the user's authorization. To implement authentication, authorization, and accounting, you will most likely use a user account. For this to be truly secure, each user will have or need to have their own account, which they only know the password. You also need to use strong passwords that change from time to time. To perform day-to-day operations, including checking emails and typing reports, you should not log on as administrator. In these situations, for those users who need administrative access, you should consider creating two accounts, one for their day-to-day items and the other for administrative duties. Since most of this lesson focuses on authentication, this is a good place to examine the different types of authentication. The different types of authentication can be separated into what they know, what they own or possess, and what a user is. The most common method of authentication with computers and networks is the password. A password is a secret series of characters that enables a user to access a file, computer, or program. To make a password more secure, you need to choose a password that nobody can guess. Therefore, it should be long enough and considered a complex or strong password. A complex password cannot contain the user's account name or parts of the user's full name that exceed 2 consecutive characters. Must be at least 6 characters in length or the number of characters specified in the minimum password length policy setting. Must contain characters from at least 3 of the following 4 categories: English uppercase alphabet characters A through Z, English lowercase alphabetic characters A through Z, base 10 digits 0 through 9, and non-alphanumeric characters, for example, exclamation point, $, pound, comma, percentage. A user account enables a user to log on to a computer and domain. As a result, it can be used to provide the identity of a user, which can then be used to determine what a user can access and what kind of access a user will have, known as authorization. It can be used for auditing, so that if there is a security problem where something was accessed or deleted, it can be determined who accessed or deleted the object. At this point, you need to understand the differences between workgroups and with local computers and domains with domain computers. The first part of the lesson covers managing users and groups on a local computer and how this information is stored in the Security Account Manager, known as SAM. This section will then end discussing the administrator account and standard accounts. A local user account allows a user to log on and gain access to the computer where the account was created. The security table located on the local computer that stores the local user account is known as the Security Account Manager, or SAM, database. There are 3 types of user accounts, and each provides the user with different levels of control over the computer: administrator, standard, and guest. Now that we have covered the need for users, you are ready to create user accounts using the User Account Control Panel and later the Local User and Groups snap-in. Remember that you would usually use the User Accounts Control Panel when the computer is not part of a domain. With a Local Users and Groups snap-in, we can add, remove, disable, and reset passwords for users. When a user logs on, a user profile is created on a computer running Windows, which is associated with the user account. While some of the user settings will be stored within the registry, others are stored on the user profile, which is part of the C:\users\login name folder, including a user's favorites and a user's personal files. That's where their desktop and My Documents are located. One of the components that is covered on the exam is the Credential Manager. When a user accesses a website where the user has to log in, the username and password used to access that site is stored in the Credential Manager vault. Looking at Active Directory. Active Directory, the bottom line, is a directory service which stores, organizes, and provides access to information in a directory. It is used for locating, managing, administering, and organizing common items and network resources such as volumes, folders, files, printers, users, groups, devices, telephone numbers, and other objects. A popular directory service used by many organizations is Microsoft's Active Directory. If you are managing computers within an organization, many of these computers are going to be part of a domain, which is managed by Active Directory. Therefore, you need to have an understanding of Active Directory and how Active Directory affects a Windows 7 client computer. In addition, if you work for an organization that uses Active Directory, desktop technicians and administrators will have to manage the users and computers within Active Directory. This section defines what a domain is and how multiple domains form a larger tree and forest. Active Directory is stored and managed through domain controllers. A server that is not running a domain controller is a member server. The only time you cannot access the local users and groups console is when the computer is not a domain controller. Since Active Directory is dependent on DNS, if a user is having problems logging into a domain, the computer could be having DNS issues.